Hey guys, Alex here from Extreme Customs and Tire Reps. Hey, we have a 2011 Mustang GT in the shop that we're going to be doing a performance upgrade with some MBRP headers with a H-pipe setup. Now this vehicle already has an exhaust on it, but we're going to put the headers on just to give it that extra growl. It's going to be a pretty badass setup, so stay tuned and we'll show you what all goes into it. So a lot of people ask, what's the difference between long tube headers, short tube headers? And so before I put this exhaust in the Mustang, I figured I'd take a second to show you guys that, you know, a short tube header is, or shorty headers in short, you'll hear a lot of people call them that, is basically this. I mean, this is the factory manifold off this 2010 Mustang, but it's usually just a set of these pipes bent up in a little bit shorter manner so that it works better with a turbo setup, or, you know, it just fits better in a tight engine bay. You know, for the hardcore enthusiasts though, they might choose to go with the long tube, which in itself explains exactly what it is. It's a long tube header setup. Now the cons to this right off the bat would be that a lot of times there's not enough room in the engine bay to fit those, and then sometimes you get issues right here with ground clearance when they're in the vehicle, because a lot of times they'll sit lower. You know, one thing to consider with long tubes is that you may potentially have to get a mini starter, or you know, a different steering shaft without the rag joint can potentially be an issue you'll find in cars with limited room. You know, a lot of guys will end up they'll wrap these in heat tape because it can also heat up your clutch lines, is a common thing. The pros to it though is you make a ton of power. I mean, the long tubes is where you get the maximum power potential when you're going, you know, all out with a V8 or pretty much anything actually you can put the long tubes on. Then explaining a little bit too, you know, this long tube setup from MBRP comes with an H-pipe. And a lot of people will ask, you know, oh yeah, what's an H-pipe, you know, exhaust? What's an X-pipe? So an H-pipe will allow the gas to kind of push against each other in the center section. It's more or less just a connection between the two at lower RPM to kind of equal exhaust flow. An X-pipe, however, though, you'll see in more modern high performance applications, because at higher RPM, it allows exhaust gases to flow a lot quicker. So like on this piece here, you'll see that the exhaust gases at a higher RPM will come together and equal out, and in turn will end up causing more power potential. I mean, one thing too is putting these things is a pain in the ass when you do long tubes. I mean, there's not a whole lot of room. So, I mean, it's for the feeble-hearted doing it in their driveway, it's gonna be a big project. You know, with a lift in the shop, it makes it a lot easier, which is why a lot of people prefer to bring their stuff to a reputable shop that can put this stuff in without doing damage to other components or seeing where problem areas might arise. So one thing with this right away we're gonna have to check is ground clearance issues. With fabbing the H-pipe into the existing setup, there's gonna be some modification with that as well. But short tube versus long tube, a little bit of info on it before I go ahead and install the long tubes in this Mustang. So the most notable thing you'll have when putting long tube headers on is drone. And that's one thing that's pretty common because you have really no restriction in your exhaust anymore. So the big thing with that is if you put resonators on it, it'll help a little bit. But I mean, when you're doing long tube headers to an X-pipe to 2 resonators and a 5-liter Coyote motor, I mean, it makes for a pretty badass combination. You know, the customer was cool enough to let us take this thing out a little bit and just show you guys the exhaust. We're just also doubling it as a test drive, making sure everything's good. We just gotten this thing finished up. Sounds like similar to something like the Nazgul leaving the gates in Lord of the Rings. I don't really know what that means, but just to show you the explanation of it. Longtube headers equal amazing sounding exhaust note, depending on what you're going for. The customer has his interior kind of gutted a little bit in the back. There's no back seat, so that'll cause for a little bit more drone. Usually when you get rid of any kind of insulation, it really amplifies the exhaust sound inside the cabin. You know, one thing to consider before doing a Longtube header install, or if you're considering doing kind of an exhaust upgrade, I mean, this is usually the extreme of it. You know, if you're gonna go long tubes, you might as well go custom exhaust the rest of the way back. You know, typically, you know, you're not gonna have any catalytic converters or anything emissions related. So again, it's all for, you know, track use. And in Wisconsin, thankfully, since zero emissions, you know, we don't have emissions regulations like everybody else. We can kind of get away with a little bit more as far as exhaust modifications go. A modification like this isn't typically something you could probably do in California or a few other states that have a lot stricter emissions. But thankfully, you know, here in the dairy state, they allow for a little bit more shenanigans when it comes to modifying a few things. This sounds pissed off. Tell you what, too, for $29,000 brand new, 5-liter V8 rear-wheel drive, that's bang for your buck. What do you think, David? That's pretty rowdy, huh?
Yep.
Just in case you want to let somebody know from 2 counties away that you're coming. Well, sounds to me like there's no rattles or squeaks or clunks coming from the setup. So it looks like the steering shaft does clear the long tubes, even under, you know, suspension flex. There hasn't been any noticeable sounds, so I think this one's good to go. Be sure to stay tuned for future builds coming out of EC. We'll take you guys along, passenger seat, take you along for the ride on the next couple good builds we got coming out of the shop here. So stay tuned, and thanks for watching.